All right, SD-WAN, we've talked about it quite a bit. I'm going to try to go through at a very high level. This isn't an in-depth technical presentation on how it works, but rather what it does and how it benefits a credit union overall. So SD-WAN stands for Software Defined Wide Area Network. I try not to use too many acronyms. I wanted to list what they are. So the big question is, what is SD-WAN? And we have the definition right out of the book, which is really boring. So it's a technology that helps better utilize your wide area network. So what does it really mean? And this is the one that really matters. SD-WAN is really a game-changing approach. This will allow our credit union clients to realize a better use of their investment in their communications. It will help them lower their actual costs. So their monthly spend, they can see a change almost immediately. And then the benefit, which I'll go into a little bit further in this presentation, to how they can keep their branches up, keep their members happy, and avoid outages, slowdowns, and things that all of the users and members typically would complain about. So we go into, how do the credit unions get to where they are? Why haven't they done things like this already? So what's the typical growth and progression of a credit union? How do they start? Where do they come from? So they typically start with opening a headquarters site. The credit union, whatever their charter type is, someone realizes it's a good idea to start a credit union to service some group of people. So they start with one. I think most businesses start very much the same way. But after they start with one and they start realizing a little success, they also realize, well, I need more than one. So they typically start with a branch. Once they get the branch set up, they realize, well, I need a way to communicate with that branch. So how do I do that? Oftentimes, especially the early stages, they're not necessarily overly technical. So they do what any company would do, and they reach out for help. And oftentimes it's the vendor selling the connectivity that is their only source of help. So they want to call their friendly neighborhood sales rep. They want to talk to somebody to say, what can I do to connect my branch, my brand new branch, to my credit union? And instead of their friendly neighborhood sales rep, they often discover they have summoned a dark minion that comes in and says, hey, I have the solution for you. And the solution, because you're a financial institution and they use scare tactics, at least in my experience, what I've seen, and the only thing you can do is an MPLS network that I happen to be able to sell you. So they start with MPLS. So I mentioned we have a lot of acronyms. So MPLS is a multi-protocol label switching type of network. I'm not going to go into details on what that means, but at the end of the day, it means I can connect those branches, but it's going to cost quite a bit of money. MPLS is not a low-cost option. However, for a number of years, it was one of the few options available. So the credit union realizes, well, I need to buy this and I need to connect my branches. So now they connect the branches to the MPLS, and they are still talking to their summoned dark minion, and they say, well, how much do I need? What's it going to cost me? What kind of bandwidth and what's the cost? In typical sales, they say, well, let me do that for you. And they usually say, you're going to start with 20 meg, and we're going to charge you the low price of $700 a month. I've checked that for Texas. I've checked that in Wisconsin, and most recently in California, and it seems to be about that rate. And it's almost a linear scale. It's $700 for every 20 meg for an MPLS circuit. So the credit union buys all of this. They sign up for a term contract, typically years. 3 years is probably the minimum. And then as usual, the person who set all this up for them, and this is no dig at anyone in sales, but they run away. So they're gone. And the credit union is left with their shiny new network, and they have their connections for $700 a month. And then as most credit unions do, they grow. So they bring in some more branches, and they do what they did before because they haven't seen any other way. So they connect those same branches to the same MPLS network, and they pay the same rate. So now I'm continuing to grow. I do it again and again. You know, it's rinse and repeat. I'm going through this over and over again. So I'm connecting more and more. And now I have a pretty well-rounded, large and growing credit union, paying the same rates for everything. When you start looking at the rates, what they soon realize is I'm spending a lot of money. So I'm spending $7,700 a month just to connect everything. It starts to add up, but it's kind of a necessary evil. And again, this is the progression of how most credit unions got to where they are.
Wouldn't the headquarters actually go up every time you add another leg, Trent, or am I off on that?
Well, it's a great segue, Jack. It's almost like you looked at the presentation ahead of time, because what typically happens next is the credit union realizes that their headquarters is woefully underpowered based on their growth. So they do exactly that. So they increase that. So now they bring in quite a bit more bandwidth for yet another higher price tag. So now the price, as you can see, continues to climb. And what's happened is the credit union has a big dependence on this now. And then, and only then, from what it seems, they start to realize this is really important. I should figure out a way to protect it, because now when something happens, it affects one or more branches. That is a weak point. Brand recognition is a big thing. Dissatisfied members is a huge thing, which everyone wants to avoid. So now they have this nice new network. They've grown, they're a good, healthy size, and they need to figure out how to protect it. So who do they call? Not Ghostbusters. They want to call their friendly neighborhood sales rep, but they realize again, it is summoning yet another dark minion. And they ask, they explain the problem. They say, what can I do to fix this problem? And the answer is usually the same: you can spend money. So what do I get for the money, and how much do I need to spend? And what exactly can I do to protect my network? And they tell them, and it's not a wrong statement. They tell them, well, you need to buy another network, and you need to buy it from another provider. So if one goes down, the other one is up. AT&T and Time Warner would be a good example. You can pick any two as long as they're different. So they do that. They bring in this whole second network. They connect all the sites. And in an effort to show, I guess, good faith and try to save a little money, they say, well, you know what? All these sites are going to be a little bit less. They're going to be a little bit lower bandwidth. They'll be a little bit lower per month. And the idea is, I'm going to save you money overall. You have the protection. And when you start adding it all up, it does add up quick. So the salesman takes off again, and they're left with another bill. They've added an additional $5,200 a month in this example to have that protection. So this is starting to add up. When you look at what they had for their primary network, and you add in all the secondary network and all the pricing, now they're at $14,700 a month in this example. I've talked with many credit unions who are higher. I've talked with credit unions who are much smaller in branches and still paying that amount of money. So there are some circuits, unfortunately, that are sold at a much higher price. But it's the nature of the beast. The branches need to communicate. They need to service the members. It's something that they have to have. Well, the credit union looks at that and they realize it is a little bit steep, but at least I'm covered. At least I've paid all this money and I've increased my overall usage, my overall bandwidth, so my branches can run even faster, or at least that's what they think. The reality is that is not exactly how it works. All they have is a secondary network that sits there idle. It's a glorified insurance policy. So they're paying a significant amount of money for something that they hope they will never use. And that's a common thread for a number of solutions in technology. Bandwidth and circuits are no different. Well, they realize that it's unfortunate and they don't really know anything else, but then they think, well, at least I do have a backup. So if something does slow down or if something fails, my backup will kick in right away and my users won't know any different, the members won't know any different. Well, that's another big not. That's not exactly how it works. What actually happens, the reality is, and I'm not going to go deep into the technology, but there are things like routing protocols and changes that have to be made. Most of them are automated, but it does take time. In a perfect world, if it's well managed, they could get down to a 30-second outage. Oftentimes it's several minutes, and if it's not well maintained, it's a full outage. I can share a story with you that happened to one of our newer clients there in California. They had MPLS, they were using AT&T. Unfortunately, they were also using AT&T cellular backups, and AT&T had a significant outage in that part of California. Happened to be on a Friday. This particular credit union is very cash heavy. A lot of people come in, a lot of the members, to cash checks on Fridays. They were completely down. Everything was down. So their well-maintained network, turns out, was not well-maintained, and they had no recourse. They had a complete failure. So what do we do about all this? The topic of the presentation is SD-WAN. So we talked about how do we roll in SD-WAN to help solve some of these issues. Now, if you recall, they summon the dark minion more than once. Contracts typically are not coterminous, which means they have different expiration dates, and it may be different for each branch, and it may be different between the primary circuit and the secondary circuit. The only thing we really know is they have that investment, they have all these connections, whoever they bought them from, that's our starting point. So what we can do is add our solution to what they already have. What that really does is now that secondary network they're paying all that money for becomes part of the primary network. It becomes an active. So we go from the green lines and the red lines to green everywhere. So now you actually can use all of the bandwidth. You now actually can have a failure or even a slowdown and not impact the credit union or the members. With the other solution, slowdowns have to slow down past a threshold controlled by the routing protocols. We've had that experience too with credit unions. We had one in Omaha who was having effectively an outage at multiple branches, even though everything said their network was up. But it was running at such a slow performance that it never failed over to their backup network, and they were effectively down. So adding SD-WAN to what we know they already have would be step one. This is an easy slide in. There are appliances that are put in at each branch that allows them to take full control and, more importantly, utilization of everything they pay for. So you have to realize their full investment. So right now, what we've done is we've introduced a technology that allows them to leverage their full investment. It provides immediate value. It provides better performance. I'm going to go into that a little bit later. It provides the availability, and it's all automated. It also is provided as a service, which I'm going to cover a little bit later as well. But the takeaway from that is the credit union doesn't have to learn a new technology. The credit union doesn't have to figure out how to integrate all of these things. It's done as a turnkey service. And coincidentally, Pure IT provides that turnkey service. Any questions so far? I'm kind of going through this fairly quickly.
And so they know they don't have an expense for the actual, is it an actual piece of equipment?
For the SD-WAN?
For the MPLS.
That's typically included with the MPLS. They charge extremely high setup fees to cover the cost of that equipment. Most MPLS providers charge several months worth of payment up front, and they call it a setup fee, but that's really to offset the equipment cost.
Okay.
What it looks like is they get equipment included with the service, but they also have that massive setup fee. Okay. Sometimes it can be 6 months to 8 months of payments on day one. So it's a significant, it's technically not a capital investment, but it sure looks like one.
Okay.
So there's a lot of cash.
Mm-hmm.
So does it sound good so far? Do you see value in this so far?
One question.
Yes.
Is SD-WAN easier to scale?
SD-WAN is extremely easy to scale. And not only that, the equipment that and I'll cover this a little bit more, but the equipment that makes all this possible auto configures itself. So you could ship a piece of equipment to a remote location. We have a credit union right now who's going to do that. They're acquiring a branch from another credit union. They're simply going to send a piece of equipment there. As soon as it plugs into the internet, it auto configures, and that branch can be connected to their corporate network in about 10 minutes.
Wow. Okay.
As opposed to what they've done with other branches, it's typically 90 to 120 days to do that same thing, because they have to order and provision circuits, coordinate hardware, very, very complicated setup of that hardware. All that has to be scheduled. So you're looking at 3 to 4 months to bring a new branch online versus literally minutes with whatever connectivity they happen to have. So sound good so far? So I had to throw this one in, but wait, there's more. It gets even better. So the next step in this process is, I mentioned those contracts are not coterminous, but they do terminate. So the first step is, let's talk about replacing those expensive MPLS lines with something that is more affordable, like an internet connection. We call that commodity bandwidth. Commodity because so many people sell it, it truly is a commodity. Vendors fight each other to give you the best deal. So we move into something that looks a little bit more like this. Instead of having an MPLS primary and another MPLS that was backup that we turned into primary. Now we have one that's internet. And not only is it internet based, it's a significant reduction in price. So now the circuits go up. If you recall, the red ones that were there earlier were actually 10 meg per site. These are 50. And I'm choosing 50 because that's the lowest that you can realistically get at most places. In California, the lowest they could get was 100. And the 100 they were getting for that same price, $70. So they were paying $400 for 10 meg before. Now they can pay $70 for 50 meg. So that is a significant difference. Or instead of $5,200 a month for that second connection, it's $770 a month. So now there's some clear financial benefit in doing this. And the benefit will increase as this progresses. Once they have this in place, now they have internet connection at all these locations. They can also start to leverage some other technologies. So today, when a credit union is using any cloud-based services, and I gave the two big ones as an example up there, Office 365 and Amazon, the way it technically works is every user has their own direct connection. So it's going out whatever their internet connection is, oftentimes backhauled, meaning it goes from the branch back to headquarters, and only there does it go out to the internet, times the number of users, times the number of services the users connect to. Generates a lot of traffic. We have actually our largest credit union client right now on the East Coast. They have a normal morning traffic storm where they have extremely slow performance getting their email going to Office 365 because of this very scenario, amplified because of their headcount. They're over 1,400 employees. So you can imagine the amount of traffic that generates. Once they have the SD-WAN implementation in place, this all changes, and it's really a big paradigm shift, because what happens now is they can leverage the internet completely transparent to them, but the SD-WAN will use a cloud service gateway. It's included, it's already part of this, and the corresponding gateways actually live at Office 365, Amazon, Salesforce, NetSuite. There's a number of large providers that already are on this network. Doesn't cost any more money. So now all of your traffic is consolidated, it's deduplicated, so it's less traffic on the wire, it's compressed, it's all encrypted. So now you have your own private encryption keys to meet compliance. And now you have one path going out to these locations that's highly optimized. So it's a benefit all the way around. And that's completely automatic, completely transparent to the user, other than now they don't have that morning slowdown. Make sense so far? So let's look at the financial impact of what we've described thus far. So what we're looking at is where they had one active circuit, the other one was idle, that they, again, hope they would never use, a glorified insurance policy. They had 20 meg of total bandwidth at each one of their branches, and they were paying $14,700 a month. With the changes so far, we've said with the new approach, they still have their primary active MPLS, that price hasn't changed. But now their secondary is also active for a much lower price. It went from $5,200 down to $770, or their total monthly spend is $10,270. And they jumped up from 20 mega bandwidth to 70 mega bandwidth. And now they have all the high availability, the redundancy, the cloud service gateways for all the online providers, all the benefit. And keep in mind, this is still all a managed service. As this continues to progress, again, remember, they have contracts, and the contracts will terminate at some point. So the next logical phase is let's replace the other MPLS and let's use only the internet. We'll use different providers to make sure we don't have an AT&T outage that affects everything across the board. So we'll still pick two different providers, but with all the prices being equal, we're looking at now that primary site that was $700 a month per 20 meg is now $70 a month for 50 meg. So now they basically duplicated what they did in that first phase, and this is phase two. So what kind of financial impact does that have? Well, when you roll that forward, that's a significant change. So again, originally one active circuit, 20 meg a month, $14,700 a month in spend. Now they have $1,540 a month. They have 500% more bandwidth, plus the availability, plus the automatic everything, all as a turnkey managed service. This is just comparing the cost of the circuits / bandwidth. And I didn't even put in amortizing that setup fee. If I had done that, that number goes up considerably because each one of those large setup fees affects every branch. In this case, they have 10 branches in one headquarters. It would be a significant added expense. I didn't even list that. But that brings up a good point. The internet connections, commodity, remember, highly competitive. There's really not a compelling reason to sign a long-term contract. You can do a one-year contract. In the next year, because you have two of them, the next year you say, I want to renew this one, and I'm going to shop and see who has the best price, because I can rip that one out and replace it without any impact to the branch. Because SD-WAN is there, when I take one down, the other one is still running, and I can swap them. So now it actually is a compelling reason to do only one-year contracts and make the vendors fight each other each year. And that may be a service that we help them with to stay on top of that. So what would probably happen in all likelihood is they would pay the same amount, but their bandwidth would continuously increase. So with all of this, and I was hoping someone would ask the question, so I'll lead into this. So I understand all of these things and it sounds great to make sense, but there's got to be another shoe dropping somewhere. You heard me mention a couple of times, there's hardware, there's SD-WAN appliances, they need to go in somewhere. So where does that come from? What's this going to cost me now? Unfortunately, most of the clients we've worked with don't ask this question either, but I do ask it for them. I want to make sure they understand. So internally, I built a tool to calculate all of this for us. And the key things I want to point out on this tool is one of the things they're getting is high availability. So at the headquarters, they actually get two pieces of equipment. The equipment automatically fails over. It fails over in 400 milliseconds, which simply means that the physical equipment dies, someone spills coffee on it, whatever it may be, it's a net zero impact. 400 milliseconds is not even a blip on the radar. The other thing is the price they would spend total for the month. You're looking at a price of $5,500 roughly for the month. So what does that mean? What's the cost? What are all the setup fees? So if you notice here, the initial setup fee is $3,900 total. That's for all of this. And here's the big one. All of that hardware is included. They don't have to buy anything. There's not a huge setup fee to offset that cost. There's no capital expenditure. There's no amortized expense for this big piece of hardware that's built into the contract. It truly is just included. So now let's see what that total picture looks like from a financial standpoint. We go back to the original, $14,700 a month, one active line, 20 meg total. And now with a full turnkey service, 100% managed, monitored, coincidentally by Pure IT, with their new internet circuits and all of the hardware, $6,300 a month for 500% more bandwidth and all of the features I mentioned already, compared to their $14,700 they had been spending. So it is less than half, and they have all of these benefits. This is the last slide. Tremendous amount of slides and documents I can go through on how you do this, but I didn't think you guys want to see that today.
And the 3,900 setup that we're charging includes, like in this case, 2 pieces of equipment at headquarters, and then it would be 1 appliance or 2 appliances at headquarters and 1 at 10 branches.
Yes,
It's
if you look
all
at
for
this chart,
3,900.
yes.
That example includes that.
Okay.
But you can change what that might be. You could actually have them all be HA,
Right.
at which point there's a different fee.
There is a price for the capacity of the appliance and the bandwidth that flows through it. That's how this whole program works. So what I listed on here is exactly what the diagrams depicted. The bandwidth, yeah, and the 100 meg.
But in many cases, it actually may be more viable to actually choose 100 meg circuits versus 50 meg circuits. And you then have to adjust this to make that work.
Right.
So you have to play with those back and forth.
There's some other a little more technical things, but I'll share with you at a very high level. Credit unions are risk averse. They are really concerned about cybersecurity. It's a huge scare tactic, but rightly so. It's real and it's growing. So they spend money with vendors on expensive firewalls, and they typically can only afford to do that at one place. They're in the mindset of, I need to bring all my traffic to my headquarters simply so I can protect my traffic. This is a significant paradigm shift because this supports something called a service insertion framework. Simply put, I can have all of the features of a next-gen firewall, a very high-end, very advanced security measure that lives inside the appliance on premise. They being VMware, who owns VeloCloud now, are opening that up to more and more vendors. Palo Alto was the very first one. That one's well established. So they can have all of the features that Palo Alto offers out at each branch without having to deploy any more hardware and no more capital expenditure.
The video's off. The presentation was over for the slides, but if you guys have any questions, this is the time. We have 10 minutes left.
What level of effort does it require from you or someone else on our team when those appliances show up here? I know you said it's 1 hour per site.
By and large, if we have a good cable diagram, we can have someone anywhere. As soon as they plug into any connection that can get to the internet, each one has a unique serial number. They go to it's called the orchestration layer that's hosted by VeloCloud, and we have our own tenant. They'll auto provision with the rules we've already set up. We don't actually have to send anybody.
So you just flip the switch?
They're going to move some cables. That's why we have to have an accurate cable diagram, and we have to have a way to vet that. So some credit unions, we have to mark suspect because they simply don't have the resources, and it's not someone going and looking and say, yeah, I think it's a purple cable.
Yeah.
We need to have someone with the ability to give us a definitive answer. So there's going to be some cases where we'll probably need to send someone. Hold on, Jack. And then we'll have the other ones that we just simply ship it out.
Wait, your turn.
Okay.
But are you doing something in our tenant behind the scenes if you're drop shipping them to even the client location?
Yes, and we're going to be doing that via templates. So we're really assigning preset rules to objects, and it's a very quick and easy thing to do. Again, I think in the early stage, it might take an hour per site. But as we move through that, it's going to go down to minutes per site.
It's Travis. I have the question. What other, I guess, outside of credit unions, what other types of businesses would this solution work for or be of value to?
I think it'll work for every business, even if they only have one site. Because for one, yeah, even us, for a location of one site, they still gain value from high availability, and they gain value from the cloud service gateway for anything they have hosted with Microsoft. Again, AWS, NetSuite, pick a large vendor, VeloCloud's already there. So there's value even for people with one site. There's added value when you have more than one site. All the things I covered for credit union is exactly the same for any business that has more than one location.
So who's deploying SD-WAN for other credit unions or other businesses? Is it
I
another?
haven't found anybody. The only credit union of all the ones I've talked to, I only found one that was even talking to a carrier. They were going to let AT&T do it for them.
The other place that I'm actually seeing that is with COCC. Anyone that's using COCC as their processor, COCC is doing a site-to-site SD-WAN.
But only for their benefit.
But only for their
What
benefit.
I've seen,
It doesn't allow you to do anything else over just their connectivity.
The scheduling
All right, so
issues.
Trent, this is just because I get some questions. You know, in our credit unions, we actually get telecom guys or guys in the IT area. So it's not just about bandwidth, but for them, it's about latency and quality of service. And I know we focused a lot on the business value, but we're going to get a push from tech guys. So how does this address something that might not be low latency or that might have, you can't control the internet connections?
Well, that's why we have two. So this really only provides value when you have two. And it does things, and this is getting more on the technical side, things like forward error correction, inline deduplication, compression. And when you put all that together, what that really does is it gives you a controllable and predictable latency. This is doing now what the WAN accelerators for the last 15 years have been doing and making good money at. So things like Riverbed, their Steelhead appliance, things like Silver Peak, Cisco Waves, very, very expensive solutions, and their whole purpose for existing was to reduce latency. That's the end of it. That's the bottom line. So now all of those features are built into these SD-WAN solutions so that you can control and predict latency. So now we can provide quality of service on things like voice, on things like video or core traffic. So the solution finds the best path with all of those features I mentioned, and it continues to find the best path. And for high priority traffic or things with a guaranteed quality of service, it will multipath those. And the best way to describe that is a race to the finish. So the packets are split, delivered over multiple carriers with all of the same efficiencies through the appliance. And then whichever one arrives at the other end first is the one that goes through, the other ones are discarded. That way we have that predictable lower latency. Keep them coming, these are good questions. Well, on the crickets chirping, I'll say that concludes our presentation.
Thank you, Trent.
Thank you, Trent.
Yeah.